There comes a moment in your life, not dramatic, not angry, not tear-filled, when you simply stop caring. Not because you don't have a heart, but because you finally remembered how much it's worth. And that, ironically, is the moment everything starts to shift. Let's talk about a paradox I've seen 1,000 times in coaching sessions, friend circles, and late-night conversations over wine. The moment you stop caring, the moment you stop bending over backwards, overanalyzing every message, worrying about whether they like you, that's the moment they start noticing you again. Why? Because psychologically, people don't chase what's always in front of them. They chase what they feel might walk away. Let's get real. Most of us were taught that love means effort. That if you just try harder, prove more, show up consistently, eventually they'll appreciate you. But effort without reciprocation isn't love. It's performance, and performance leads to burnout, to resentment, to losing yourself. But when you let go, not from bitterness, but from clarity, you stop asking, how do I make him choose me? And instead start asking, what would it look like to choose myself? Let me say this clearly. When someone feels your absence more than they appreciated your presence, they wake up. Your silence becomes louder than your texts ever were. Your distance becomes more powerful than your closeness ever felt. See, we tend to think that pulling away means losing, but sometimes walking away is the win. Because here's what letting go actually says. I no longer need your validation to feel whole. I'm done convincing someone of my worth. I choose peace over performance, and suddenly, like clockwork, he starts to chase. Why? Because you're no longer reacting. You're no longer available on demand. You're no longer broadcasting need. You've entered what I call the abundance mindset, where you realize your time is valuable, your love is a gift, and you get to be chosen, not begged for scraps. You're not being cold, you're being clear. You're not playing games, you're protecting your peace. And that clarity, that standard, that energy, it's electric. Let's stop pretending that the one who ignores you just needs a more understanding. Let's stop making excuses for people who only reach out when you pull back. And let's start asking, why was I trying so hard for someone who wasn't trying at all? Look, I'm not saying you should manipulate anyone. I'm saying that when you naturally stop chasing, when you genuinely start focusing on your own life, your own joy, your own energy, two things happen. The wrong people fall away. The right people step up. And trust me, you want the kind of person who steps up. You want the kind of man who doesn't need to lose you to realize he values you, who doesn't wait until your attention is gone to finally see your worth, who doesn't treat your love as convenient background noise, but as a song he never wants to stop hearing. So if you're in a space right now where you've been bending, shrinking, overgiving, take a breath, then take a step back, because the real game changer isn't making someone want you. It's realizing you don't have to chase to be wanted. Let go, not out of punishment, but out of peace. Let go, not to make them miss you, but to remember yourself. Let go, not because you're weak, but because you're finally strong enough to stop settling. And when you do, you'll be amazed at who suddenly remembers your worth. But more importantly, you'll no longer need them to. There's this deeply ingrained fear in so many of us, especially when we've emotionally invested in someone, that letting go means we're losing, that it means waving a white flag, that it's the equivalent of saying, or you win, I'm done. But that's not what letting go is, not even close. Letting go in its healthiest and most powerful form is not about defeat, it's about reclaiming your power. It's the moment when you stop outsourcing your peace to someone else's behavior, when you stop making your joy conditional on whether or not they text you back, when you stop tying your self-worth to how much attention you're receiving. Most of the time we hold on because we think if we just do a bit more, say the right things, stay patient long enough, they'll wake up and realize we're what they want. We romanticize their potential, even if their actions consistently show otherwise. We stay hopeful that with enough love, enough effort, we can bridge the gap between their indifference and our desire. But here's what we overlook. Every time we stay in that place of emotional limbo, waiting for someone to finally match the love we're giving, we're quietly teaching ourselves that our feelings don't matter. We're telling ourselves that being chosen someday is worth more than being respected now. And that's where letting go steps in, not as a resignation, but as a radical act of self-respect. Letting go is saying, I am no longer willing to keep auditioning for a role that someone refuses to cast me in. It's saying, I don't need someone else to validate me to feel valuable. It's saying, I choose clarity over confusion, peace over performance, and self-worth over self-sacrifice. You take your power back when you stop engaging in one-sided relationships, when you stop texting someone who gives you half-hearted replies, Hanze, when you stop justifying someone's mixed signals as a them being busy, when you finally admit to yourself that love isn't supposed to feel like constant anxiety and second-guessing. Because here's the truth, holding on out of fear is not loyalty, it's emotional self-abandonment. And every time you prioritize someone who doesn't prioritize you, you dim a little more of your own light. You become quieter, more hesitant, more dependent on their scraps of attention. You become smaller. Letting go reverses that. Letting go is what allows your voice to come back. It's what allows your boundaries to stand up straight again. It's what recenters you in your own story. Because the moment you detach from trying to control someone else's affection, you give yourself the freedom to start nourishing yourself. To reinvest that energy into the things that actually feed you, your purpose, your peace, your people. And do you know what happens then? When you stop chasing people who aren't meeting you halfway, you create space for those who will. When you stop waiting for someone to love you properly, you begin loving yourself in ways that make others step up or step out. When you stop fighting for someone else's attention, you suddenly have the time and clarity to reflect on why you were fighting in the first place. Letting go in this sense is not passive. It's not you sitting in the corner, heartbroken and defeated. It's active, it's intentional, it's you choosing yourself, even when it hurts. It's you saying, I deserve more than confusion and inconsistency. It's the courageous step of no longer allowing your emotions to be tethered to someone else's indecision, of no longer mistaking your effort for compatibility, of no longer believing that love has to be hard to be real. Letting go is not weakness, it's clarity, it's strength. It's the exact moment your heart starts healing, not because they came back, but because you finally came home to yourself. There's an invisible energy we carry in relationships. People don't always respond to what we say, they respond to what we radiate. And few things are more universally felt than the difference between neediness and confidence. Let's get something straight. Wanting connection isn't needy. Craving intimacy, love, attention, these are all deeply human desires. We're wired for it. There's nothing wrong with wanting someone, missing them, or hoping they reach out. But neediness kicks in when that desire turns into dependence. When we don't just want them, we need them to behave a certain way so we can feel okay. That's when the shift happens. Neediness is the energy of I can't be okay unless you validate me. It's the look you give when they take too long to reply, and your entire mood crashes. It's constantly overthinking your last message. It's planning conversations like they're job interviews. It's walking on eggshells, adjusting your truth to keep them interested. It's the feeling of holding your breath emotionally until they do something that makes you feel worthy again. And whether you realize it or not, that energy speaks volumes. The problem with neediness is that it transfers the power in a relationship away from you and onto them. It turns you into a mirror that only reflects back what they give you. You start reacting instead of creating. You start waiting instead of living. You become hyper-attuned to every small signal they send, and before you know it, your happiness is no longer something you create, it's something you chase. And here's the paradox. The more you try to get someone to fill that emotional void, the more they pull away. Why? Because people subconsciously sense when your interest in them is rooted in fear rather than genuine desire. They feel when you're trying to get something from them, validation, reassurance, identity. Neediness makes you a passenger in someone else's car, holding out hope they'll take you somewhere you could be driving yourself. Confidence, on the other hand, flips the entire dynamic. Confidence doesn't beg for love, it chooses it. Confidence says, I want you, but I don't need you to feel whole. It's the energy of someone who is emotionally self-sufficient, someone who doesn't chase validation because they already know their worth. Someone who can flirt, connect, and even fall deeply in love, but who always remembers that they are their own anchor. Confidence isn't arrogance. It's not about thinking you're better than anyone. It's about knowing that no one else defines your value. That you bring something to the table, and if someone doesn't see it, that doesn't make you less, it just makes them blind to your worth. And the irony, that energy is magnetic. Why? Because people are drawn to what feels full. Think about it. Who feels more attractive? Someone who's centered, vibrant, present, enjoying life, or someone who's waiting for you to make them feel better about themselves? Confidence invites curiosity. It sparks desire. It sets a tone of equality. It communicates, I'm not here to prove myself, I'm here to connect. And that unbothered energy, that calm assurance, it creates space for someone to come toward you, not out of obligation, but out of true interest. Confidence is what allows you to say no to breadcrumbs. It's what allows you to walk away when someone treats you like an option. It's what keeps you from over-explaining, over-giving, or over-apologizing just to keep someone around. Confidence isn't about playing hard to get. It's about being hard to forget. It's about being hard to forget. Not because you manipulated them, but because your energy, your self-possession, your clear sense of value, it left an impression. And that impression lingers long after the conversation ends. There's a deep psychological truth that plays out in every type of relationship, friendships, romantic connections, even business. People value what they fear they might lose. Not necessarily what they have, but what they know they could stop having. See, the human mind is wired for scarcity. When something feels abundant or always available, it becomes easy to take it for granted. It fades into the background. It loses its sense of urgency. But the moment that same thing is at risk of disappearing, suddenly it becomes important. It's as if people wake up and realize, wait, this could be gone? That realization? It changes everything. This is why showing up fully for someone, giving endlessly, being available at all times, and expecting that it will lead to love or commitment often backfires. It's not that kindness is the problem. Generosity, loyalty, consistency, those are incredible qualities. But when they're offered without boundaries, without balance, they lose their edge. They become expected rather than appreciated. People stop leaning in when they know you'll always lean forward. The moment someone knows that no matter what they do, you'll be there, that no matter how much they ignore you, you'll still text, that even if they don't prioritize you, you'll adjust your whole schedule to fit theirs. That's when your value begins to slip in their mind. Not because you're not valuable, but because there's no cost to having you, no risk, no edge, no reason to reflect. People don't reflect on what feels certain. They reflect on what feels at risk. This is why distance creates desire, why space leads to clarity. Why stepping back can speak louder than begging ever could, because your absence highlights your presence. Your silence forces them to hear the echo of what they used to take for granted. It invites them to finally see what they were blind to when it was right in front of them. Think about it. How often have you only truly appreciated something once it was no longer in your life? That job you used to complain about until you lost it. That friend you stopped checking in with until they disappeared. That partner you thought would always be around until they finally stopped calling. People rarely change when everything stays the same, but introduce the possibility of loss, and suddenly clarity arrives. They begin to remember your laughter, your effort, your loyalty, your light. They remember the way you made them feel seen, the way your presence brought peace or excitement or comfort, and they ask themselves the question they never asked before. What if I never get that again? Now, this isn't about playing games. It's not about manipulation or withholding love to create fear. It's about understanding your worth and respecting it enough to not overstay where you're undervalued. It's about walking away when being taken for granted becomes the norm. It's about not begging someone to see your value, but allowing the absence of your energy to reveal it. There's a moment in every dynamic where you teach someone how to treat you, not through your words, but through your absence. When you stop chasing, when you stop over-explaining, when you stop showing up for someone who refuses to do the same, you shift the entire narrative. You go from being the one who's always available to the one they notice is missing. And that noticing, that's when appreciation is born. Because value doesn't always come from giving more. Sometimes it comes from giving less, strategically, intentionally, respectfully, from creating space that says, I am a privilege, not a guarantee, from showing someone through your actions that you will not remain where you're not cherished. When people sense that you're willing to walk away, that your presence is not endless, they start to listen. They start to measure the cost of their indifference. They start to weigh what they could lose against what they thought they didn't need to hold on to. It's one of the great paradoxes of love, of life, of human relationships. Sometimes holding on too tightly is the very thing that pushes people away. And letting go, the act that feels most unnatural in a world that tells you to fight for what you want, is what actually opens the door to something real. Letting go doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you give up on love or close yourself off. It means you release the illusion that control, pressure, or constant presence will deepen the bond. You stop trying to force outcomes and instead allow space for what's meant to unfold. Because real connection doesn't come from clinging, it comes from freedom. When you hold on too tightly to someone, whether out of fear, insecurity, or longing, you unknowingly begin to smother the very thing you want to grow. You start watching their every move, overthinking texts, adjusting your personality, bending your boundaries. You shapeshift to keep the connection alive. But the irony, in trying not to lose them, you start losing yourself. And people can feel that. They feel when you're no longer bringing your whole self to the table, when you're performing instead of being. When your presence becomes more about needing validation than creating shared joy. That's not connection. That's anxiety in disguise. Letting go disrupts that cycle. It allows both people to step back, breathe, and see things for what they really are. It gives the other person the chance to move toward you by choice, not by obligation or pressure. It gives you the chance to reconnect with your own energy, identity, and clarity, so that when someone does come close, they're meeting the real you, not a version that's been molded out of fear of loss. Letting go also sends a powerful message. I value this connection, but I value myself more. And that's attractive, because what you're really saying is, I'm not here to force you into my life. I'm here to build something mutual, something meaningful, something grounded in Letting go creates emotional space, and in that space, something beautiful can happen. You start to notice who actually makes an effort, who reaches out, who checks in when you're not the one driving everything. And most importantly, you start to notice how you feel without that constant mental strain of trying to keep someone close. You may realize that the connection wasn't as deep as you thought, or that you were doing all the work, or that you were afraid of being alone, not in love. In that silence, the other person begins to wake up, to appreciate, to see you for the first time without the noise of constant pursuit. But none of that clarity can happen if you're always reaching, always trying, always filling the silence before it teaches anyone anything. Real connection is a two-way street. It requires vulnerability, yes, but also balance. It's not about convincing someone to choose you. It's about inviting someone to meet you where you already are, whole, grounded, and open. When you let go, you create the opportunity for a connection that's not rooted in fear or neediness, but in presence, honesty, and desire. You give yourself the space to receive love, not chase it. And you give others the chance to rise, to meet your energy, to show up because they want to, not because you beg them to stay. Letting go isn't walking away from connection. It's clearing the emotional clutter that blocks real intimacy from growing in the first place. It's trading tension for trust, pressure for peace, desperation for dignity, and above all, it's allowing life and love to meet you with what's real, not what's forced. Whether you realize it or not, every moment you interact with someone, you're communicating your standards. Not necessarily through your words, but through your actions. What you allow, what you tolerate, what you reinforce with silence. People take cues from you on how to treat you. They learn what you'll accept, what you'll overlook, and what you'll stay for. And that's not about arrogance. That's about self-respect. See, standards aren't just preferences. They're boundaries with integrity. They're the quiet rules you live by that say, this is what I'm available for and this is what I'm not. They protect your energy. They filter your relationships. They ensure that you're building something based on mutual respect, not survival or sacrifice. The problem arises when we start confusing being easygoing with being available at all costs. When we think having no standards will make someone love us more, stay longer, or feel more comfortable. That if we bend over backward, stay silent when hurt, or keep giving more than we receive, we'll eventually be rewarded with their effort, affection, or consistency. But people don't fall in love with doormats. They fall in love with mirrors, people who reflect back to them a standard they want to rise to. If you teach someone that they can come and go as they please, that they can be inconsistent and still receive your time, your body, your heart, you are silently saying, this is the price of entry. Do less and I'll still be here. And guess what? They will do less, not because they're evil, not because they don't care, but because you showed them they could, and it works the other way too. When you set standards and live by them, you attract people who either rise to meet them or naturally filter out. Both are wins. Because someone who values you won't see your standards as demands. They'll see them as a framework for connection. As a structure that says, I'm here to build something real, not entertain what doesn't feel good. You're not high maintenance for expecting consistency. You're not ichumachu for wanting effort. You're not selfish for saying, I don't chase, I reciprocate. That's emotional maturity. That's clarity. That's clarity. That's ikstaham. That's saying, I know who I am. And I'm not afraid to lose someone who doesn't see that. Your standards also teach you something important. They help you check in with yourself. Every time you let something slide that feels off, you chip away at your own sense of self. Every time you say yes when you mean a no, you train yourself to accept misalignment. And before you know it, you're emotionally exhausted, wondering why you feel resentful, invisible, or undervalued. But when you stick to your standards, not in a rigid, defensive way, but in a calm, grounded way, you feel proud, you feel aligned. You send a message not just to others, but to yourself. I matter. My time matters. My heart matters. My heart matters. It's not about punishing people. It's about rewarding yourself with the kind of relationships that reflect your value. The ones that bring peace, not confusion, growth, not guessing games, effort, not excuses. And here's the thing. People remember how you made them treat you. If you held the bar high, if you didn't fold at the first sign of inconsistency, if you walked away when it became one-sided, they'll feel that. Even if they didn't appreciate it in the moment, they'll remember it in your absence. They'll realize that you weren't cold, you were clear. You weren't distant, you were self-aware. Your standards don't scare away the right people, they reveal them. Because the ones who are meant for you won't just meet those standards, they'll be grateful for them. Letting go isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's the moment you stop gripping so tightly and start allowing space for someone to show up on their own. When you stop chasing, you stop handing over your power. And in that stillness, that shift, you create the kind of magnetic energy that draws people in. Not because you're trying to be chosen, but because you've already chosen yourself. Neediness repels, confidence attracts. Every time you act from fear of losing him, fear of being alone, you lower the bar. But when you start acting from value, when you hold your space instead of scrambling for someone else's, everything begins to change. You no longer live in reaction. You live in alignment. People value what they might lose, but more importantly, they value what doesn't constantly try to prove itself, what doesn't beg, what doesn't settle. You become rare, not because you're playing games, but because you finally learned to stop playing yourself. Letting go creates space for real connection, not one rooted in performance, but in presence. Not based on fear, but on truth. And in that space, you see who comes closer. You see who listens when you go quiet. You see who meets you halfway. Not because they have to, but because they want to. Your standards are your guide. They're not about being cold, hard, or unapproachable. They're about saying, yeah, I know what I bring. I know how I want to feel. And I'm no longer negotiating with energy that doesn't match mine. You are not here to convince someone to treat you well. You are here to show them how and walk away if they don't. Because the moment you stop caring from a place of desperation and start loving from a place of strength is the moment everything starts to shift.